Our special guest tonight for the evening is a public school teacher and former evangelical Christian who lives in Mississippi and writes about his various challenges to live as a non-believer in the heart of the U.S. Bible Belt. He's appeared at various conferences and even had a piece written in Time magazine. Neil's deconversion cost him personally, socially, and professionally. His website is a treasure trove of stories and ideas that will make you happy, sad, angry. It'll make you laugh, it'll make you cry, and everything in between if I've missed anything. It doesn't matter if you're a nun, I should say, or a done, or a never was. If you want a better understanding of the dichotomy between devout religious beliefs and the atheistic beliefs we hold as humanists, there's no better place to start reading than Godless and Dixie. So it's my pleasure to introduce Neil Carter. Hi, Neil. I'm just moving to the camera here so you can see me.
Hey, can y'all hear me okay?
Yep.
Excellent.
And you can see us okay?
I can. I see all of you.
Okay. I see there's a little picture here. Okay. Okay, I don't want to look at the screen. I need to look at the camera. So what's it like in Mississippi right now?
Right now? Well, it's finally getting cold. It took a while. Sometimes we don't get winter at all. Sometimes it just kind of goes straight from summer, back to spring again and skips winter entirely. And then other times we get single-digit temperatures. So we never know what we're going to get. And it changes every 24 hours. Maybe it's that way for y'all too. I don't know.
No, it's actually just been cold this week. I think it's about minus 10 or 12 right now. So.
Wow.
Well, Celsius. I don't know what is that in Fahrenheit? I have no idea. They started teaching us 5 or 6. So I guess that's
5 or
cold. 6.
Yeah. Okay, that's cold. That's why I don't live in Canada right now.
I'll get ready. We've got a full house. You packed the place. It's nice to see. I don't know if you were able to see around the room, but we'll pan around a little bit, and hopefully people will come up with their questions. So I'll start, and it's one thing to lose your faith, another to come out, yet another to put your thoughts and life out there for everybody to see, starting a blog like Godless and Dixie. And I was just wondering, what motivated you to put it out there, to start, being really public?
That's a good question. And the truth is, my publicness comes and goes depending on the season. When I first lost my faith, I would say it was almost 10 years ago now. And I kept it completely to myself. In fact, for the first year, I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell my wife. I didn't tell family, friends, anybody. Because it was a very personal, private thing for me. And I also knew there would be a lot of pressure from people to come back to the faith. But when I finally realized I was an atheist and I probably wasn't going back, I thought I would pretty much keep it a secret forever. But one day, so let me backtrack. Back in 2012 or so, Facebook gave you fewer controls over who could see what. And so what ended up happening is some of my students were stalking me on Facebook, and they saw that I had liked some atheist pages. And they came to school the next day, and they said, they raised their hand in the middle of class and said, "Mr. Carter, are you an atheist?" Just out of the blue. And you have to understand, in Mississippi, everybody is a Christian, or at least everybody's pretending to be a Christian. It is what we call the buckle of the Bible Belt, but I've noticed, by the way, that everybody says that about where they live. But it's very concentrated where we are. And so I dodged the question, and I tried not to answer it. I said, as a public high school teacher, I'm a representative of the state. I'm not supposed to express leanings one way or another on political or religious matters. And so I dodged the question. And she said, "Why didn't you say no?" And I knew what she meant. She meant every other teacher that works there would say, "Oh, of course I'm a Christian." And they would tell what church they go to and that sort of thing. So a couple of weeks later, my principal confronted me about it. She came to my class before school started, and she told me that people were talking about me, saying that I was an atheist. And I was teaching history at the time, and she instructed me not to speak about religion or politics for the remainder of the school year. But I was teaching history. So obviously that was a problem. A few weeks later, they realized I'm also certified in math. And when a vacancy came up in the middle of the school year, they moved me to a math class in the middle of the school year, which was, pretty disruptive. But I did it because I didn't want to get in trouble, and I knew that it was going to be a problem for me now that people were talking. So at the end of the year, they called me back in, and they said they didn't want to hire me again for the next year. And when I asked them for the reasons, they just wouldn't give me any. So, at that point, I knew exactly what the reason was. They no longer trusted me, because around here, everybody believes that your moral fiber comes from your religious beliefs. And so if you are not a religious person, you cannot be a moral person, and they no longer trust you. And honestly, from the administrator's standpoint, it would be a nightmare to have an open atheist as a teacher at your school. Pressure from the parents would be constant. So at any rate, they didn't bring me back. And at that point, I realized I might as well start writing about it, because writing is what I like to do. And while I was keeping it a secret up until then, apparently even keeping it a secret wouldn't keep me out of trouble. So I finally realized I should just go on and start writing. And so in 2013 is when I started writing the blog, thinking that only people from Mississippi would even care what I had to say, because I had no idea that the Bible Belt isn't so much one specific region in the southeastern United States. It's more of a culture that pervades North America. And I often say that as soon as you get 20 minutes outside of any major metropolitan area, you're back in the Bible Belt, because that's really the way it is. So I began writing and realizing that people all over identified with what my experience was, trying to unpack all the religious baggage that I had as a Christian. So that's what I've been doing ever since.
Okay. Have you, going a little bit more what people are like in Mississippi, have since you've come out and been more public and are in Mississippi, do you find there are now like small groups of humanists, or people meeting privately or just even for coffee to get together and, in secret?
There are now. To answer the rest of the first question, to give you a little bit more of a picture of what it's like, there was a day a few years ago where I woke up in the morning and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to write down everything that happens today, just to take a snapshot of what it's like to live in Mississippi. So I woke up that morning and I overheard on the radio that our governor, who was running for re-election, took sides on a political issue that he knew would get him reelected. Somebody was trying to pass a personhood amendment that would declare personhood begins at conception, which would effectively outlaw abortion completely for the entire state. And he campaigned on his support for that measure. It was defeated, by the way, because most of the doctors in the area said it was very imprecise legislation, and even the ones who were against abortion didn't like the way that it was worded. But the governor knew that it would play to his audience better to come out very openly in support of this personhood amendment. And he got on the news and said that anyone who opposed the amendment is working for Satan, is working for the devil. This is our governor. And the thing is, that's normal here. People wear their religion on their sleeves. If you move to the area and you want to start a new business, the first thing you do is you join a church, because that's how you meet people. And that's how people believe that they can trust you, as they see you going to their church. All of our politicians, of course, have to have church memberships. And if you go to their websites to see what all their political views are, there'll also be a listing of what denomination of Christianity they belong to. And every person in the state has that listed. Except for a couple, and I think that was just because, they didn't want to say that they weren't really believers anymore, but they weren't going to come out about that. So when I did come out as an atheist, of course, it was an extremely unpopular decision. It caused a lot of tension with my family, as you would imagine. All of my family are still very devout believers. That includes my children. There were problems that arose from that in my marriage. So I have to back up. Can I tell a little bit of my story?
Go ahead.
I would
Please
need
go ahead.
to. Okay, so I grew up in Jackson, Mississippi, and I grew up Southern Baptist, which is pretty much standard evangelical teaching. And when I got saved, I was converted during a youth evangelism conference at age 15, and I dove in headlong. Up until that point, my family was mostly just nominally members of the church, but I dove in and got involved in the youth group and became the most committed person in my family. In fact, I remember a night that my father pulled me aside and gave me a lecture about how much time I was spending at the church, which was funny. But later on, we switched places. When I became an atheist, now they're all very involved. And I have one brother-in-law that's on staff at the church where I grew up, and my sister was the choir president up until a few months ago. So things have flip-flopped for me. But when I got involved in the youth group, I really did hit the ground running. I was taught as a Baptist that you're supposed to study the Bible. You're supposed to try to be as much like the New Testament church as possible. It's a major fixation for evangelicals. Of course, they don't really know what that means. But when I began to read up about the first century and I read the Bible back to front, and what I realized is that nothing like what was in the Bible was happening where I was. So actually reading the Bible was one of my first steps out of the faith, because I began to see that there wasn't anything analogous in my experience to what they were experiencing in the Bible. I also read how Jesus was really critical of the religious people of his day, and I was impressed by that. He was using critical thinking skills in those stories. They would come to him and say, your followers aren't performing this ritual before they eat their food, so the food is unclean. And Jesus was like, you know what? The food you eat just goes into your body and right back out the other end. It doesn't go into your heart. What comes out of your heart is what makes you unclean. And the Bible says at that point, Jesus was declaring all foods clean. Well, that's a pretty revolutionary thing to say, but what he was doing is he was using critical thinking skills. And I began to do the same thing. I started asking questions about why I had to believe what people told me to believe, and I got that from reading the Bible. So really, I just did what they said. But over time, I decided that I was going to be giving my life to some kind of ministry. So after seminary, I decided I wanted to be a teacher and just do ministry for free, in my spare time, because that's the way Paul did it. He had a job, and then he did his ministry at night. So I became a teacher and was teaching history and English at the beginning. But it didn't take long before I started to realize that I couldn't really answer all the questions that I had. And it's a long story for how I ended up giving all of it up. But eventually, when that time came, I realized that this was going to be pretty disruptive. And I had moved to Georgia, to Atlanta, to be a part of a house church movement, which is a separate story in and of itself. That was one of my first steps out of the faith, was questioning why we do church the way we do it. And so I got involved in a house church movement that met in homes. But after about 10 years of that, I realized I really didn't believe any of it anymore. I had even written a book about it at that point and just decided I didn't believe it. So we moved our family back to Mississippi, in part, as far as I was concerned, to try to salvage a marriage that I thought was probably going to be in trouble, because my marriage was based around a common faith. That's what drew us together, was we had a very similar faith. Now that I no longer had that, I knew this was going to be a major problem for us as a couple. Turns out moving back to Mississippi was probably not the best thing for our marriage, because most of the counsel that we got, I think, was very divisive, personally. We, of course, sought help from a Baptist minister. That's who did our therapy. And the more we talked to him, the more I think it just kind of drove a wedge between us. We had a lot of issues we had to talk about, but they weren't issues that were uncommon for couples that had been married for 10, 15 years. And but the one thing that was getting in the way was we couldn't find common ground, because in Christian marriage counseling, everything comes back to Jesus. Everything is rooted in Jesus, and they believe that not only do you have to believe in Jesus to be a moral person, but you have to believe in Jesus for a marriage to succeed as well, which, of course, is demonstrably false, because Christian marriages end at the same frequency that non-Christian marriages end, but that doesn't stop them from believing it. So every time we tried to work through our differences, the answer was always, well, you need to come back to Jesus. And that wasn't going to work for me, obviously. So what I found happening with my wife, of course, ended up happening with everyone else. None of my friends really wanted to hang out with me, because I think it made them uncomfortable, because I wasn't a Christian anymore. Several of them that had been in my wedding, several groomsmen, staged a kind of intervention one day where they drove from different states and asked me to call in a sub for that day so they could just grill me about 100 different things. If God didn't make us, then where did we come from? If we came from monkeys, then why are there still monkeys? And no kidding, they asked me, how many times do you masturbate in a week? And how often do you look at porn? They asked me, do you still struggle with lust? And I wish that I could go back and answer, well, no, it's only a struggle if you resist. But at the time, I was trying to keep the peace. And so I really just kind of laid down and accommodated everybody. If I had it to do over again, I would be a different person during that process, because I pretty much gave up everything and did everything everyone said to do. And it didn't do any good, because the only thing that was going to make them feel better is if I came back to professing faith in Jesus. So a couple of years later, my wife and I did divorce. It was a very difficult decision, and it took a year of therapy, but we just couldn't find common ground. We couldn't find anything essential that we could agree on about how to work on our marriage. And before long, I was in a relationship with another person who actually was an atheist like me, and we met through a small group that had just begun to meet of local people in Jackson and in the surrounding area. At first, we started out as only Facebook friends, a handful of us, 50, 60 people. But over time, the group kept growing, and now it's about 700 people. They're scattered all over the state of Mississippi, but most of them don't actually see each other on any regular basis. In fact, they may not ever meet because there's not a good way to do that. You know, one time I drove up to Oxford, Mississippi, which is where the University of Mississippi is, Ole Miss. And there was a small group of humanists that were getting together that wanted to meet up there. And they picked a local bar to meet at. And I drove up there, and when I walked in, I realized I didn't know what I was supposed to say about who I was looking for, because they weren't going to go into the bar and tell everybody we're a group of atheists. They're not going to do that in Oxford, Mississippi. So I began walking around the restaurant to ask people what they were there for, trying to find the right people in the group. And finally, I found one person, and I said, "Are you with the group that's not supposed to talk about what the group is?" And they said, "Yes, that's us." And that's actually how we found each other. We just had to walk in and begin asking people if they could tell why they were there. And if they couldn't, then that was our group. So this is how closeted you have to be. And we use that term, closeted. But through these meetings, I met someone that I ended up becoming partners with for 5 years. And for the first couple of years, I became very much integrated into her family. Her parents welcomed me into their home. I moved in with her, took care of her son. I was very much a part of their family, celebrated Thanksgiving and Christmas with them. But then one day it came out that I had begun writing about my atheism. And they found a video of me addressing a group, talking about what it's like being godless in Dixie. And they were very upset. They called us in and they gave us a stern talking to and said that I would not be welcome in their home anymore. And when the next holiday rolled around, I think it was Thanksgiving, I was still not welcome in their home. And so my partner said, "Well, then I guess I'm not coming either." And so they ate Christmas dinner and Thanksgiving dinner completely by themselves because she's their only child. And when they banned me from the home, she decided not to go either. But it kept getting worse. Occasionally I would get these random angry texts from her father about how I was only becoming an atheist because I wanted to become rich, which, by the way, doesn't work.
Didn't work for me.
It doesn't work. Everybody tends to project their own issues onto you when they find out you're an atheist. And they assume that whatever they struggle with must be what you struggled with, and that's why you left. Which is interesting since some of those groomsmen just kept talking about sex. But everybody has their own assumptions about why somebody leaves. And of course, the first assumption is always something bad happened to you. You know, somebody must have done you bad, done you wrong. But that never happened to me. I actually had a very positive experience in church. I was one of the people who I think I performed well in church. I fit very well, and I was very well liked and became very popular in church. Didn't really have any bad experiences. And then when I became a part of the house church movement, I quickly rose to leadership there as well and began being sent to different churches. I even got sent to Frankfurt to help start a church there. There was a church in Colorado Springs, another church in Jacksonville. I started traveling. So I had a good time in church. It's just that I changed my mind about everything over time. It wasn't that something bad happened to me, but that's something people always assume. Actually, I've had a much worse experience outside of the church, not only from the atheist community, because it turns out the problems that happen in the church also happen in the atheist community. Just telling you that in case you didn't know. But I also found that, when you try to explain to somebody who is still a part of the church that the church can turn very mean and nasty on you, they won't believe you because they've only seen the generous side. They've only seen the kind side of the church because they've always been on the inside. But the moment you identify as somebody who's no longer a part of that group, you become a foreign substance. You become a foreign object that it's almost like the body begins to try to reject what it is and defend itself from you. Somebody said one time recently that it's almost like You're speaking to them through a screen door. Lori Arnold said that, and I love that analogy. She said it's like there's a screen door that they're standing behind when they talk to you. They're going to continue talking to you, but there's just something there that's in between you that you can't seem to get rid of. It's like a defensiveness on their part. Anyway, to end that story, my former partner's father passed away a couple of years ago, and he was so angry that we didn't come back to the faith that he went and wrote her out of his will. He wrote her completely out of his will because he said that if he died and left his money to his daughter, it would go to support atheism, because he knew that I was traveling and speaking and writing, and he was afraid that I would take whatever his inheritance was and I would spend it on promoting atheism. So he completely wrote her out of his will, basically disowned her, and then he passed away. So he passed away estranged from his daughter, and that was because I had come out. You know, they found out about her atheism, my partner's atheism, because of me. And it's because I was being open about it. And this is what happens to you. You know, if you it's one thing to say that you're an atheist. It's another thing to get up in front of groups like this and talk to them. Because to a Christian, that's like what a pastor does, or like what a preacher does. So from their viewpoint, what I'm doing right now is I'm evangelizing for atheism. You know, I'm trying to convince other people to be an atheist, which is, first of all, it would be fine if I did that, because if they can do it, so can I, right? But for another thing, it's not even what I'm doing. Most of the time what I do is I try to talk to people to help them understand that what they're going through is also what other people are going through, and to help them connect with each other. You know, just recently I started a Facebook group that's completely private for people who cannot comment on blogs and can't comment on public Facebook forums because their family will see it, and that will be the end of their acceptance in their families. I mean, families will be broken up, marriages could end, jobs could be lost. That's how bad it can be, and I've got another story about that as well. But they needed a secret place to have discussions, so I started a secret Facebook group. I think y'all have one too as well, right? So this group that I started, I figured there'd be, a couple of dozen people that would jump into it. And it was more like 300 in a matter of a couple of days, because there were a ton of people who were reading the blog, but they could never say a word, because if they did, they'd be caught, and they're not ready for that. So back to the job situation. After I left the school that wouldn't take me back, I kind of stayed quiet about the atheism for about a year. I went to an inner city school district where I knew they would take anybody. And I began teaching there. And a few months later, CBS wanted to do a special about people who were openly atheist. And I volunteered for it. So I went on the show and I did another talk about being openly atheist. And sure enough, things started changing at my job. Before I knew it, my students were carving things into the desk. They were carving Bible verses. They were painting the name of Jesus onto the wall.
A little light vandalism for Jesus, I guess.
I call it evangelism. So at any rate, in a class like mine, it's a lot of inner city kids, and there's a pretty rebellious element there. But there's a lot of good church-going kids there too that help keep them straight. But for that group, the moment they found out that I was an atheist, they now saw me as either an enemy or they saw me as a project. One day I was grading papers at my desk, and this girl came up, and she was one of my best students, and she stood over me. The body language was clear. She stood over me, and she said, "Do you know why I'm in your classroom?" And I said, "Because you need to learn math." And she said, "No, that's not why." And I said, "Why then?" She said, "God put me here." I said, "Okay, why did God put you here?" And she said, "To save you." And I said, "From what?" And she said, "Yourself." And I thought, this is incredibly disrespectful. From her perspective, what she was doing was she was evangelizing me, and she was trying to tell me that she had something she wanted to share with me, but it was really condescending. And she was not even half my age. But this is what the kind of religion I came from does. It entitles you to feel like you are what Cassidy McGillicuddy calls the designated adults for the entire world. That's what faith teaches people, is that they have been authorized by God to tell everybody what to think and to tell them what's wrong with them, because that's all love. That's all an expression of love. Of course, in my opinion, that's a pretty warped view of love. I think it was a warped view of love that disowned my partner because they were trying to teach her a lesson. I think a lot of the friends that turned away from me felt that they were doing me a favor by not hanging out with me anymore. But it's a warped view of what love looks like. And so I actually spend a lot of time just trying to make people understand that love isn't love if it harms, but they have been given a really messed up model of what love looks like. To them, love might look like killing people, because in the Bible that actually happens. Anyway, sorry, that was a long, rambling way of answering a question. I'm not even sure which one I just answered. I think I've lost your sound, though. Did your mic lose its battery? Excellent.
How about now?
Great, because I don't know sign language. Yes, thank you.
Okay. I don't know sign language either, so it'd be a problem there. No, it just all through your story. Myself, I've been a lifelong atheist. I don't know what it's like to deconvert from anything. Tried to believe in my teen years, but that didn't work out. But I hear these stories from our members. Even the meeting in secret outside of town, that happens at the Pembina Valley secular community, and what struck me near the end of the friendships that have broken down, I guess, of yours, you said one of the things that almost seems to be unanimous when I talk to people is that when somebody comes out as an atheist or a non-believer and the friendships ends, it seems to always be the religious that break off those friendships. Is that your experience, or?
That's a really tricky question. I think that they would say that we are the ones that are separating from them. I know this because I've heard them say that. But what ends up happening is when people are very insecure, they begin to read things into other people's reactions. And a new filter comes up, like the screen door that I was telling you about. I don't feel threatened by religious belief. I just don't, because I used to traffic in that. I have a degree in Bible. I told my students one time that I had a degree in Bible because they asked me, Mr. Carter, how do you know so much about the Bible? And I said, well, I have a degree in it. And they said, is that like a belt? Like in karate? And I said, yes, I have a black belt in Bible. And which means I could, kill you with it. But where was I going with that? Sorry, I lost that train of thought. I'm very comfortable with religion and religious belief because I used to teach it. I used to communicate it to other people. One of my children a couple of years ago began trying to evangelize me. She was, I think she was 10 years old. No, she was 12 years old. But her Sunday school teacher does apologetics for a hobby. By day, he fixes air conditioning units. But by night, he is a champion apologist for Jesus. So he was teaching all of the Sunday school students, including my daughter, how to do evangelism. And so every once in a while, she would just kind of break into an evangelistic spill. Like we were coming home from a skating rink one night, and she said, Dad, where do you think good and evil come from? That was just out of the blue. And I was like, well, good is what we call things that are helpful to people and that help them, that benefit people. And bad is what we call things that do not benefit people but harm them. And she's like, well, how do you know that's good and bad? How do you know harming people is bad? And I know where she was going with this. She was trying to build up to an argument that Christian apologists use, that they believe there's no such thing as morality outside of their faith. It's incorrect, of course, but she was building toward that. And the thing is, I enjoyed it because I used to do this. That's what I used to do for a hobby too. And I had to explain to her after we made it through that discussion that I used to do what her Sunday school teacher does. So I'm extremely comfortable in these waters, and I don't feel the need to separate from them. In fact, tomorrow morning, just for the fun of it, I'm probably going to go to church because every time I go, I have like 5 posts to write afterwards because it's so inspiring. I think of so many things I want to say, and I can't say them because the preacher won't stop talking. But at any rate, I'm very comfortable around religion, and you can't live in Mississippi and not be comfortable. So I know that it's not coming from me, but they don't know that because what they are doing is they are projecting their uncomfortability onto me, and they're also reading intentions into me and into things that I say that are not actually there, but I can't convince them they're not there. Like, here's a good example. Excuse me. Not too long after I came out to my family and told them that I wasn't a Christian anymore. I was still attending church because I was still married, and my wife wanted me to be there with the family, and that was also a point of contention, was to talk through that, because I was getting ulcers from attending every Sunday. I'm not the kind of person who can just sit and tune it out. I have to listen to everything, and I become emotionally engaged in everything that's being said. So for me, church can be almost triggering, because I care too much about these things. I care a great deal. I used to be a person up in front of people, so that's why I care so much about these things. But the music minister got up, and he was just talking in between the songs like they do, just to fill the gap there while people reposition themselves for the next ensemble. And he began talking about how we should pray that God would heal us of our hard-heartedness. And I don't know if you know, but like in the Old Testament, they also talk about the people of Israel being stiff-necked. It's hard to say. It's like stiff-necked, but it's got an ed at the end of it. In the Old King James, you might say stiff-necked. So what he said was, he got up in front of the church and he said, I really want God to heal us of our hard-heartedness and our stiff-neckedness. And I started to giggle because I was waiting for anyone else to pick up on what was funny about stiff-neckedness. I'd never even heard that phrase before. But I kept it to myself because nobody else was laughing. Nobody. Which is one of the things that happens when you're a regular at church. You miss innuendo entirely, but you get outside of the church, and of course, it's all we talk about is sexual innuendo. One of the ongoing jokes is, you never run out of material if you just look at church signs. The stuff they say is hilarious, but we always tell them, always run your church signs by a teenager first.
Yeah,
they will save you so much grief and heartache. But I said something on Facebook later that night about how funny it was when the music minister said hard-heartedness and stiff-neckedness. My family was so hurt by that. They were deeply hurt. And here's what my point. When I used to be in ministry, we used to rib each other like that all the time. Ministers do that to each other. When they finish the worship service and they go out for coffee or food afterwards, they pick on each other all the time. It's just a camaraderie kind of thing, There's nothing off limits, and that's part of how they build community, is they tease each other. Well, I didn't have anything personally against him, but they read the most vicious tone in what I was saying when I was just trying to be funny. But to them it wasn't, because they saw me as an adversary at this point. Which is amazing, because at that point I was completely closeted. I wasn't talking to anybody. I was still married and trying to hold the marriage together. I wasn't talking about my beliefs to anyone, including my family, because I just don't want to introduce strife in the middle of a relationship, especially since I know I'm the only person in their circle that's this way. I'm completely outnumbered in my family. I'm the only atheist in the whole family. So no, I'm not going to pick a fight over this, and that's just not my style. I'm a conciliatory person, a peacemaker. But they just read the most sinister intentions into it. And I think that's what happens, is I think that because faith is such a fragile thing, it is very fragile. It's like a house of cards that if you breathe on it too hard, it's going to collapse. That's why there's so many protective mechanisms around it. There's excuses and explanations and defense mechanisms built up around it so that nothing will, assail it. But in reality, it's just a very sensitive system of belief. And so people begin to get defensive when they don't even need to. Or maybe they do, because they know that just your existence makes them feel threatened. All you have to do is exist. You don't have to say anything at all. The fact that you no longer belong to their club means that their club has now just lost one of the legs of the table. Greta Christina says religion relies on social consent in order to perpetuate itself. And she's right. And the moment someone says, I'm no longer a part of that religion, you have now stolen one leg under that table, and you've weakened their position. So there's literally no nice way to be an atheist to a devout evangelical. It's offensive just by existing.
Oh, this is on, right? Okay.
Yeah.
We do at HAAM, we do quite a bit of outreach in festivals and the more religious communities and that. And yeah, that's a common theme. Sometimes we just offend people by being there. No matter how nice and how much you smile and say hello, you always get the eye as they walk by.
Yeah. Well, you could show up at a race and you could pass out bottles of water to people. But if they see that you're wearing a shirt that says, for example, Mississippi Humanists, they're going to be offended by that because they're like, wait, well, they may not know what a humanist is actually. But if it says atheist, that's a dirty word. Humanist has a little bit of niceness to it still because people don't know what it means. But you say atheist and people become extremely defensive.
I wonder if way back when that child outed you, your student outed you, if you said, "Oh, atheist, what's that? I'm a humanist." If they would have been completely baffled for at least a week till they looked it up. But
right. The thing is, because I was into that sort of thing as a teenager, I studied cults and foreign religions and apologetics, and I would have known what a humanist was. If you are independent Baptist, a humanist it always is prefaced by the term secular humanist. And when you say it, you kind of crinkle your nose like you're saying something that smells bad, because to them, a secular humanist is this militant position that is trying to destroy the church. It's taken over all of the sciences, it's taken over all of the universities, and now it's trying to take over the high schools, and it's already taken over Hollywood. It's like this massive monolithic system out to destroy the faith of the church, and at its head is Satan, And so if you're independent Baptist, you know what that is. But most teenagers around here, they wouldn't know what a humanist is, but they would know the A word, and that would get their defenses up.
I just wanted to touch on your blog, and then if anybody else has a question or wants to talk to Neil, go ahead. Your blog, I said in the beginning, I discovered it. I think Dorothy, one of our members, posted something probably about 3 years ago, and I thought, well, this is better than your average blogger. The more I read, the more I liked, and it's just because for you to be able to identify. Explain things from the other side as someone on this side, if I can use those terms, really explains things to me, things I can't understand being a lifelong atheist. And I just wanted to, I have probably about 6 that really struck me of your blog posts over the years, but I'm just going to just briefly talk about one, and it's it's from way back.
I've been doing it about 5 years now, I think.
It was how you use movies and that to illustrate the points you bring up, and it's actually, I guess, just a great way to explain things to me. But it was how Toy Story illustrates when I lost my faith.
That's one of my favorites.
And if everybody's familiar with the movie Toy Story, Buzz Lightyear, Woody, but there's a part in Toy Story where Buzz finds out that the narrative that was given or programmed into him when he left the toy factory wasn't true after seeing a TV commercial.
Right.
And he found out that he was a toy, just like everybody else.
And then he got depressed.
But for me, we have a lot of people that have left evangelical and fundamentalist belief systems. And I always figured, like, how did they ever pick themselves up after having basically your entire worldview cut out from underneath you? That's right. But it was this paragraph that really kind of explained it to me, and it says, Buzz learned to find purpose again. Was it as grand and epic as the narrative he was originally taught? No, honestly, it wasn't. But it was real. The most exciting fairy tale in the world isn't more satisfying than the story that happens in real life. Buzz had plenty of adventures ahead of him. He had a group of friends that he could embark on his new missions. He still had a lot of cool gadgets and some skills that weren't too shabby. His life wasn't a waste just because it turns out there's no intergalactic battle to fight. He found purpose and excitement and companionship in the real world. In the end, he didn't lose anything that was real. And I thought, yeah, okay, I get how they can pick themselves up again. And
it takes work, though.
I could never fit, but yeah, I don't know, it resonated with me for some reason, and it was, like so many of your blog posts, really insightful.
Well, thank you. I think in movie lines, and you really can't spend more than 10 minutes around me before I quote a movie. And Pixar is a family favorite, so anything that Pixar puts out, we go see as soon as it comes out. In fact, we get advance tickets in my family. But Toy Story was definitely one of the favorites, and What happened to Buzz is exactly what happens. You were given a narrative that is so grand and so exciting. For me, it wasn't just about dying and going to heaven. That's what a lot of people get when they are Christians. But I was one of the people who dove more into it, and I found more depth to my Christian faith. There was a lot of resonance with really high themes in my faith. There's a verse in, I think it's Ephesians or maybe Colossians, that says that what's happening in the world right now is that God is showing off, basically, to the universe, and he's doing it through the church. Now, it so happens that that's pretty anticlimactic, because I've been around and I've seen the church and I know what it's like, and I know several different versions of the church, and it's not glorious. But in my head, it was. In my head, I was a part of this grand narrative that made me a part of the most significant, exciting thing that was happening in the entire universe. It's a very egocentric worldview, of course, that you believe that somehow the earth is the center of everything that's going on in the entire universe. It's the place where God cares the most about what's happening. It's very egocentric. And I talk a lot about how Christian faith doesn't really do a good job of alerting people to their tendency to project. And I've got a post that's just 10 things that Christians accidentally tell me about themselves. And one of them, for example, is about how much they believe. They keep saying that my worldview is egocentric because I'm a humanist. But first of all, they always mischaracterize humanism as individualism, when it's not. Humanism is the belief that you are a part of a species that needs to work together to find solutions to the world's problems. It's not about you individually. But I've done a whole series that picks apart Tim Keller's book, Reason for God. And one of the things he keeps doing over and over again is he keeps mischaracterizing humanism as individualism. And then he tears that straw man down by saying it's egocentric and it's selfish and self-centered, and how could you ever know what's right and wrong if it's just you yourself determining everything? But in reality, they've got a belief system that makes them the center of the universe. The most powerful creator of everything cares about what they ate for breakfast and whether or not their bank checkbook is balanced. These are the sorts of things that to me smack of egocentrism. But you leave that, and all of a sudden, so much of the magic goes away from the world. It's like there aren't any small children around, are there?
No.
Right. Okay. You're thinking, what's he going to say
Just
now?
feel free. You can speak completely freely here.
It's okay. No, because my kids could be watching this at some point. That's why I almost never curse in my videos. But the moment you wake up on Christmas morning, the first year that you know Santa Claus isn't real, there's this letdown, because all the way up until then, it's been this exciting, electric thing. You can almost not go to sleep at night the night before Christmas, because you can't wait to see what you're going to get in the morning. And of course, you feel that way even if you don't believe in Santa Claus, but it's even more so if you believe in it. You think there's this magic to the occasion, and you lose that. And it's kind of sad, just to be honest. It's not real, but it's still sad to lose it. And that's one of the things that when I try to use that analogy, of course, it makes Christians very mad because it equates Jesus with Santa Claus. But, what are you going to do? But it's kind of a pretty good analogy, is that the magic goes away, which doesn't actually mean that you're wrong. It just means you had a belief that worked great when you were a kid, and now you need to find something else to give meaning to your life. And it turns out that's always been what you're doing. It's just that up until now, other people have given you what that meaning was. And if I could anticipate something tomorrow, I don't want to interrupt you for too much, but tomorrow morning I'm putting up another post, and I'll give you all a sneak preview of it right now. It's about Forrest Gump. And do you know that scene in Forrest Gump where young Forrest has been wearing leg braces his whole life?
He starts running and loses them?
As he begins to run because he's being chased, the braces fall apart, and it turns out he's a sensational runner. And he never knew that because the braces, of course, kept him, hobbling around with straight legs. Turns out that was his strongest suit. And for the rest of the story, his ability to run fast becomes the thing that makes him who he is. Obviously there's his character as well, but all of the exciting things that happened to him because he's good at running. So it turns out something that was key to his personality and to his character was being held back by these braces that when they first were put on him, they had a purpose. He had a crooked back that needed to be corrected. But there came a point where the braces no longer were needed, and actually they were getting in the way of him becoming who he was going to be. And I think that's a perfect analogy of what happens when you lose your faith, is that a structure has been put in place. It's almost like doctors. Imagine if doctors believed that everybody's backs are crooked and they all need to be corrected with braces, so that every child that's born automatically gets braces on. Of course, that would be ridiculous, but in a way that's metaphorically like what Christianity does. It says that everybody's broken and they need to be fixed. And so from the first moment they're born, the church begins telling them how to think about everything, how to see everything, how to speak, what to read, what to watch, whether to dance or not to dance, whether to drink or not to drink. Everything is structured for them according to what the church believes they need. But then for some of us, there comes a point where we realize this thing is getting in my way. I've got something I need to do, and these things are no longer useful for me, and we break out of them. And that's when we first begin to find out who we really are, because it turns out there was something in us that was being held down. And the church actually does that on purpose. And this is going to be one of the most negative things I say, but there's a reason for it. The evangelical Christian faith teaches us that we are broken. At our core, we're wicked, and that we need to be saved. And throughout the entirety of your Christian life, your inability to do whatever it is that God wants you to do is like the background noise of the entire faith. Everything is predicated on the idea that you are incapable. But the moment you begin to realize you actually are capable of doing things, that's when you begin to break out. And instantly the church is going to resist that. They're going to tell you that what you need to do is give those over to God. Surrender your strengths to God, because God doesn't want people to become too strong or too good or too smart or whatever. The church actually teaches you can be too smart for your own good. I don't think that's correct, but that's what I was taught. Anyway, sorry, that was another movie. And I could just keep going on with movies because I love movies.
No, I look forward to reading that one. That's tomorrow. Mm-hmm. It'll be up tomorrow? Okay.
Up in the morning. I even did an MP3 of it because it's 4,000 words long, and a lot of people don't have the time to sit around and watch that. But when I recorded it, it was only 20 minutes. So that's like, a bike ride.
Oh, good stuff. But I've yacked long enough. Is there some questions? Anybody at all? Because I can keep going.
Sure.
Did you want to come up, Grant? Yeah. It's just then he can see you, you can see him.
It is a wireless mic, though, if somebody doesn't want to get up.
Oh, I'm up here.
Hi.
You can hear me all right?
Yes.
My impressions are Canada is generally getting less religious all the time. When I mention I'm an atheist, usually I get no significant reaction. Assuming I'm right, do you think that applies to the States and the world generally? Will can you see within 100 years or 200, atheists will be more common than believers?
I don't know how to answer that question. That's a good question. Thank you. Back in the late 1800s, especially after the Darwinian revolution was happening, people in academia began to, sound out the death knell of religion. They began to say, religion's going to go away now, because, up until now, God was necessary to explain how humans came to be. But after evolution was discovered, people said, wait, so maybe God isn't needed, or maybe it's even like it almost looks like it wasn't directed as an intelligent process at all. And they began to say, you know what, this is going to totally undermine religion. It's going to be gone in a generation. There won't be any more believers. Of course, that would be terribly wrong if they believed that. In the late 1800s, there really was a surge in secularism. But that changed in the early 1900s because radio was invented and preachers realized they could use the radio. And they took over the radio waves and they used it to get out their message. And every time new media happens, they jump on that. They jump on television. Right now they have the internet, When I first deconverted and began interacting with other people, which, by the way, that's the first thing you need to do. If you are somebody who, like Buzz Lightyear, just figured out that it was all made up, first order of business is to go find other people, even if you have to just do it online. That's what I had to do, because I didn't have anybody in real life that I could count on as somebody who could accept me exactly for who I was without trying to push me back into the faith. So I had to find friends online. But I began to hear people say, with the dawn of the information age and with the availability of the internet, religion's going to go away because everybody has access to so much information. All this top secret information about the history of the Latter-day Saints tradition came out. Like papers and letters that were written by, who was it? Like was it Joseph Smith's wife or girlfriend or somebody? Anyway, all these things started coming out and becoming available online, and people said, this is going to destroy the church. And I don't really know about the LDS church. Apparently you're not supposed to say Mormon anymore. I don't know. They decided that earlier this year. I don't know how you could just do that, but they did. Now they're saying it's offensive to use the word Mormon, and God hates it. But it's weird. But the thing is, if you've been watching, for example, what's happened in the political landscape, not just in America, but everywhere, you know that misinformation travels just as fast as information. In fact, I think it travels faster. People say Mark Twain said this, but I don't think he did. Somebody said that, lies travel halfway around the world before the truth can even tie its shoes. And I think that's true. I think that more people than we realize are actually not that smart. And I really hate saying that because that sounds elitist. I know that sounds elitist. I'm a teacher. That's what I do for a living. I try to make people know things they didn't know before. But I'm watching what's happening, and what I'm finding is it's like I'm living in a horror movie where every day I find out that whatever my impression was of the intelligence level of the world around me, I need to bring it down a few more notches. Because people believe things so easily, not just about religion, but about politics, about history, about anything that happens. We've had school shootings all over the place. At this point, our flags, are put at half-mast whenever, there's like a shooting, and it just stays there, half-mast all the time. I don't remember the last time one of our flags was at the top, because there's always a shooting going on. And what ends up happening is crazy. After a school shooting happens and the families step in front of cameras to talk about how much they are grieving the loss of their children, people begin sending them death threats. They start coming to their house and throwing bricks through their windows, and they start terrorizing them at their jobs, and they start telling them that they're faking it, that they're making it up and they never even had a child, that they were all actors that were being hired by the government to try to fake it so that now the government can use it as a justification to come for all of our guns. This is what people actually believe, and it's because of the internet. I think it makes misinformation just as readily available as good information. And so, do I think atheists are going to be the norm 100 years from now? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know if my country is going to exist in 100 years. I really no longer have that confidence. The more I see how quickly people believe what they are told, the more I think, even if we still exist 100 years from now, we're not going to be one of the big guys. We're going to be one of the ones that are just trying to keep up with everybody else because, the fool and his power soon are parted or whatever. I think the church knows just as well as anybody else how to seize new media and to use it for their benefit. And I think the church is going to continue to morph and change its message to fit whatever the culture is, because it's been doing that for centuries. And every time somebody says, well, that's it, now it's going to go away, it comes back again in a new form. Ironically, the evangelical church doesn't believe in evolution, at least not in the South. Up north, there are some evangelicals. They call themselves evangelicals, and they still accept science. But for the most part, evangelicals, white evangelicals around the country, reject basic tenets of science, including evolution. But ironically, their religion evolves constantly. Every time one type dies away, a new type rises up that has some of the same basic problems to it, but it's just changed the vocabulary to fit a different generation. So I can guarantee you that religion's going to be around 100 years from now. Will atheism? Sure, but I don't know that it's going to be running things. I don't even know if I want them to run things because I've met a lot of atheists and I don't like them all. I'm going to go on and throw in that because I go back and forth between these two worlds. I'm like an amphibian. I've got one foot in a religious world and one foot in the atheosphere. And I go back and forth between the two all the time, which is a double life, and I'm going to go crazy. But what I am finding is that there's just as many jerks, just as many people willing to take advantage of people, and there's just as much tribalism You know, there's just as much of the things that you don't like seeing in church. There's just a different version of it outside of the church. The things that plague us socially are not just because of religion. I think religion accelerates them, but it's just a vehicle. Religion is just a vehicle to communicate cultures. And if religion were gone tomorrow, we would have a lot of the same problems. We would still have people trying to maintain positions of power over people that are powerless. We would still have racism in my country, and it would still be tearing things apart. We would still have runaway income inequality that makes people like me unable to pay my bills, even though 50 years ago, teachers used to be able to, have a decent living. Things have gotten kind of unraveled where I am, and I don't think that getting rid of religion is gonna make that better. I think the problems are bigger than that. They have to do with who we are as human beings, and until we figure out how to handle those problems, with or without religion, we're still going to have them. They're just going to keep changing form. Sorry if that was a downer, by the way, but I'm just trying to be honest.
Okay, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, my name's Arthur, and I really want to thank you because you explained something to me that I really didn't understand. And it's, I've been an atheist for a long period of time, and I've been a member of this group for 2 to 3 years. I'm quite open about in this group that I'm an atheist, and for most of my friends and most of my family members, I commonly use the term atheist, and there's no problems with that. But what I know is there are some of my friends and some of my family members that I never use the term atheist. I use the term like non-religious, or I don't go to church, or I'm not a Christian or something like that. Because I know that if I used the term atheist, it would hurt them and it would affect my relationship with them. I don't think I'm a hypocrite, but I value their friendship. I value my relationship with them. And I don't know if you do that too, maybe with your children or with people that are important to you. Avoid using terms like atheist just because you know it would hurt them.
I do. Thank you. That's a very good question. This is probably a good moment to also throw in that one of the posts that is very pivotal for me was when I wrote about the nuns versus the duns. There's been a lot of press over the last few years about the rise of non-religious people. As much as a quarter of the American population now calls themselves unaffiliated. What they don't then turn around and tell you is that the majority of that quarter of the population still considers themselves religious. Or they might use the term spiritual but not religious. They still believe in God. They still hold to a lot of their basic tenets of their faith. They just don't really like church anymore for one reason or another. And I don't blame them, because some terrible things happen in church. In fact, the man that I just told you about, who wrote his daughter out of his will, and she was his only child, by the way, he didn't go to church anymore. He quit going to church decades ago because he had run-ins with leadership, and they treated him terribly, and he quit going. And a lot of people quit going because they've heard everything there is to say. It's like, oh, this story again, oh, this message again. You get to where you can almost predict what they're going to say. A lot of people just get bored and quit, and I guarantee you, every pastor that retires, they don't go to church anymore, because after you've been up front and been in charge of saying everything, you don't ever want to sit and listen to somebody else talk again. It drives you nuts. I've seen that happen over and over again, and in a way, it's kind of the way I am as well. But there is a difference between the nuns and the duns. Among the nuns, the non-religious, not the N-U-N, but the N-O-N-E-S. The nuns are the people who, for whatever reason, they don't identify with one denomination or one religion or another, but they might actually still believe a lot of the same things. Within that, there's a smaller portion of people that consider themselves atheist or agnostic. And the way that I use those words, by the way, they're almost interchangeable. A lot of people use them the way that the Dawkins scale does, where it's got agnostic as just below atheist, as if they're different degrees of the same spectrum. Whereas for me, they kind of answer different questions. If you ask me, do I believe in any gods, I say no. That makes me an atheist because I don't believe in gods. If you ask me, do I know that no gods exist, I'm going to say, well, actually, no. Technically, no. Just not yours. I can't say for sure, for example, that the God of deism couldn't exist. But why would I care? It would be a useless concept. Like, there are ways you can conceive of divinity that are completely irrelevant to daily life and would be just academic as far as I'm concerned. So do I know for sure that no gods can exist? No, not really. So I guess that makes me an agnostic. But I also am an atheist because I don't believe in gods. So to me, they're just kind of, it's a semantics game. Anyway, that's just a little sidebar. Where was I going with that? Oh, so if you actually survey how many Americans use one of those two A words, atheist or agnostic, and put them together, it's about 7%. Roughly 3% call themselves atheist, 4% call themselves agnostic. So it's not even in the double digits as far as actually owning up to the words. Now, I had this ongoing argument for a while with David Silverman of American Atheists about whether or not atheist is the better word. And from his perspective, it was better branding to use the atheist because it's more in your face. You know, it's more confrontational. He even had this study where he would talk about how billboard campaigns are good because they stir up local press. And, you know, the billboards that come out and say, like at Christmas time, everybody knows it's a myth, or this Sunday morning, stay home from church. You know you want to, or something like that. You know, they say these very confrontational things. And David and some others believe that that's actually a very effective way to challenge people's faith. And maybe there are people that does help. But I will tell you this. In Jackson, Mississippi, that doesn't play very well. It just creates what we call the backfire effect, where you are declaring yourself a hostile to the people that you're trying to communicate with, and they're just going to dig in their heels and turn you off. Nothing you say from that point forward is going to be heard at all, and you're wasting your energy and wasting your time. I know this because these are the waters I swim in. I know this culture. If you're in a highly religious culture, being adversarial, it might fit some people's personalities, but it doesn't actually build any bridges that are useful. Honestly, it just burdens the bridges. And so like you in the question, Arthur, I do that too. I keep my beliefs to myself unless something really urgent or important is coming up that needs, movement right now. Because the thing is, my family by now knows that I don't go to church anymore. I'm an atheist. They even know that I write about it, but they never talk about it. My children never ask me about it. I see my ex-wife like 5 or 6 times a week, and we never discuss it because we're trying to be on good terms with each other. And, there will come a time, I hope, where my children and I will be able to actually have more open discussions about this. I do have one daughter, the one that was trying to evangelize me. She's actually the one who has been the most open with me about her own doubts, which, by the way, is something I should throw in. Apologetics, I'll often say apologetics, which is the defense of the faith, it's not for the lost. Apologetics is for the saved. It doesn't exist to convince people to become Christians. That's what Christians think it's there for. That's what people who write the books and do the talks say it's for. There's even a seminary professor in the Baptist Convention that insists that apologetics is how we will spell evangelism in the 21st century. That's something he likes to say. Well, it's baloney. Because if you've ever tried to read any apologetics books, first of all, it's incredibly boring. The reasoning that they give is usually full of so many holes that you really can't believe that people are into this stuff. But the reality is that most apologetics books are written for Christians. And it's about them feeling better about their own beliefs. Apologetics exists to convince Christians that they're not being foolish for believing what they believe. And I was going somewhere with that, and I lost my train of thought. One of the main differences between the nuns and the duns, to wrap it up, is that somebody who has been a part of a faith tradition knows how important it is to those people not to be combative about how they talk about their differences. If you want to maintain good relationships with them and your family is very, very devout, then whipping out conversations about religion at the dinner table is probably not the best thing to do over Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas dinner, which, by the way, I think is one of the questions we were going to talk about. If you're a dun, you know what it's like to be a believer. You remember the insecurities, you remember the doubts, and you remember how fearful you were that somebody was going to come along and say something that you weren't going to have a good answer for. And you're going to lose sleep over it. And you're going to stop and think, what if everything I believe is wrong? Apologists like to talk about Pascal's wager. They love to say, what if you're wrong? Aren't the downsides to being wrong about religion so huge that you might as well just believe just to, hedge your bets? Well, first of all, faith doesn't work that way. You can't just believe on cue. I don't know about them. Maybe they can, but I can't. I don't work that way. But even if I could, if their God can be fooled by faking it, then is he really the God they think he is? And of course, fear is a terrible reason to believe in something. And I don't even know how you can be afraid of something that you don't even think is real. Nothing about this makes sense. I had a family member one time ask me if I was willing to admit there was at least a 1% chance that I was wrong about God. And I said, well, yeah, I have to admit that because I'm a skeptic. I have to always question everything. And he was like, well, on that probability, you should believe just to be safe. The funny thing is, earlier that week, a Muslim had said the exact same thing to me. Are you willing to admit there's a 1% chance you could be wrong about Muhammad? And I said, well, yeah. And he said, well, on that chance, don't you think you should honor the prophet and become a Muslim so that you will avoid Muslim hell? So it's literally damned if you do and damned if you don't. If you believe in Jesus, you go to Muslim hell. If you believe in Muhammad, you go to Christian hell. And I tried to explain that to the person who was telling me this, who was a close family member, and he didn't get it, because he could not put himself in my shoes and realize that I can't be made to be afraid of something that I don't even think is real. It's like asking me, don't you want to put garlic on your door just in case vampires are real? Well, no, to me, it's not enough of a realistic belief to even put forth the effort. And besides, it stinks. So the difference between nuns and duns is we do tend to identify more with believers because we used to be one. And I think it sometimes makes us a little bit more, what's the right word? A little bit more tentative about our own beliefs. If you've always been an atheist, and now as an adult you're convinced that you've always been right, then you've never had to change your mind significantly about anything, which can make you pretty cocky, actually. But if you're like me, and at one point you devoted your entire life to something that you now think was made up, it was a social construct, I now know that I can be fooled, that I can fool myself. And from this point forward, I am going to have a certain epistemological humility whereby I know I can be wrong. In fact, I've been putting off writing memoirs about my deconversion for years. And one of the main reasons is I keep being worried that however I write it now, I'm going to be embarrassed by 10 years from now. Because I'm going to look back and say, why did I say it like that? Why did I even think like that? Because now I think so differently. I know too much how much I can be wrong. And I think that's a good thing, personally.
Does anybody have another question, or not at all written questions? Anybody have a written question? Okay, well then I got one.
Okay.
It's actually interesting. It's I have been a lifelong atheist, and apologetics is kind of a kind of a hobby that I like beating myself up with, because I belong to
You're
a
a
couple of groups.
masochist.
We've been out to the got invited to an apologetics conference and things like that, and it's like, yeah, you sit there with the big bingo card and just, it doesn't take long before you fill that card right up.
Yep. It's like everybody's running on a script, and they don't know it either.
Yeah. Usually with the first speaker, you can fill that. I'm just gonna talk about one other story in your blog that hit me. Just talk about hitting the nail right on the head, and it was what Christians mean by when they use the word atheist. That was written a couple of years ago, I think. Long before I joined this group, I didn't have a background engaging with I've met the religious, the weak tea Anglican type. That's nice. I've never met the evangelical, the fungelicals.
Those aren't real Christians.
We've gotten that too, but you start going to things, but often you'll hear about the ones that are former atheists and have converted, and they're now evangelical. And you make mention of Lee Strobel, Kirk Cameron, Ray Comfort, that kind of thing. And one of the ones I met personally is a talk I went to on evolution, and he was a what did they call it? A creation evolutionist.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Evolutionary creationists.
Evolutionary creationists, but they believe in evolution and try and put the whole Bible and everything together. But he was talking about, in this science talk, he was talking about how vacuous and empty and unclean he was when he was an atheist. And when we do outreach, we often have people that come up and say they're former atheists, and they tell us about their lives I don't want to call these people liars, but you hit the nail on the head. Like, you put it in words that I'm going to use sometime.
Okay.
But as you write, I'm genuinely listening to these things from former atheists, what they are saying, and I honestly haven't heard an atheist say these things they are saying. It reminds me of that scene, a movie reference again. It reminds me of that scene from the 40-Year-Old Virgin when the guys are sitting around discussing the feel of a texture of a woman's breasts, and Andy reports they feel like bags of sand. The other guys freeze, turn and stare at him like he has an extra appendage growing out of his forehead, and clearly the man has no idea what he was talking about. And anybody with any real life experience would know. And that's like us in the outreach booth. It's like the guy or woman will be talking is like, really?
Yep. And, so I can explain then.
Your blogs.
Continue. No, don't let me interrupt you.
Oh, it's just one of the. I mean, if you haven't read his blog, Godless and Dixie, at least go to what is it? The favorites page? No, the introduction page.
Yeah. Well, if you Google Godless and Dixie. Google will then subdivide some of the main headings of the site, and one of the first subheadings that'll show up under the main heading is a beginner's guide to Godless and Dixie. In fact, if you go on the blog, also there's a tab at the top that says Start Here, and if you click on that, it's a page with like 200 posts listed, and they're categorized according to topic. So you can just scroll through and pick whatever topic you want to read about, and I've probably written about it if it's relevant to all of this stuff. So it's on there too. I'm pretty sure that one's toward the top. Yeah, so to elaborate on that, everybody who's an apologist and everybody who does evangelism says they used to be an atheist. And the reason why they say that, and by the way, they were raised in a Christian family. They probably went to church. They probably attended Sunday school regularly, and they may have even sung in the church choir. But when they talk about their conversion later, they will say that they converted from atheism. And what they mean by that is, you have to understand, there's a verse in the Bible, which, by the way, gets in the way of a lot of problems. There is a verse in the Bible that says essentially that everybody deep down really believes in God. It's in Romans chapter 1, where Paul is explaining that even people who grow up outside of the cities, the pagans that will never hear either the Jewish faith or the Christian faith, they're still going to be held responsible for their sinfulness, because somehow all of the most important moral details about the universe are woven into them, and they're supposed to just know it. He even makes this wild claim that just looking at the world, you can deduce from it certain things about God, like personality traits. He never explained what he meant by that. I don't even know how he could settle on what the right number of gods is, because if you go look at primitive cultures all over the world, they tend to be polytheistic. So if anything, the world must teach people that there are lots of gods, not just one. Actually, that would make a lot more sense, because they clearly don't agree with each other. There's nothing that makes sense in the world. Like rain comes at times that don't make sense. And if you lived in Mesopotamia, these floods would come out of nowhere, and you never knew where they came from because they came from mountains hundreds of miles away. But instead of understanding what was happening, they just thought the gods were mad. So they'd kill something to make the god happy, and then the rain would stop, and they'd think it worked. Wow, that was way off topic. But Paul actually argued that deep down, everybody knows not only that there's just one God, but that his God in particular is the right one. And he never explained why that would be. He just says it, and that was it. And so for that reason, people feel entitled to tell me that I really still believe in God. I've heard people say there's no such thing as an atheist, because the Bible says everyone believes in God. Now, not just any God, but specifically Abrahamic monotheism. Everyone, even the polytheists out there. Paul was pretty nervy to say that. I don't even know where that came from, but because he said it, they now all believe that, which means that there's no such thing as atheism the way we would conceive of it, because for us what it means is lacking belief in gods, or even positively disbelieving in gods, however you want to pair that definition. Because they believe that's a null set, that no one exists in that category, then there can only be people who live as if there is a God and people who live as if there is no God, even though they all believe that there is a God, and it's specifically the God of Jesus, right? And so what they believe is if they were ever not following Jesus at some point in their life, like they had a rebellious teenage years, that was their atheist period. Now, they always believed in God, and they specifically believed in Jesus. You know, like there was a time period where I was still attending church and I was going to Sunday school, and I believed that Jesus died on the cross for my sins. I actually believed all that. But I was not personally invested in that story. To me, it was just kind of this thing they talked about at church that didn't mean anything to me personally, and I didn't want to have anything to do with it. I believed that when I was old and I had, had my fun, that I would teach Sunday school and make up for all the bad things I did when I was younger. That was kind of my plan. Of course, I ended up getting saved and getting totally into everything. And that's the mentality, that something changed when I got emotionally involved in a conference at age 15 and committed my life to Jesus. And so that time period before that, when I was kind of doing things I wasn't supposed to do and being rebellious, the standard thing would be to call that my atheist phase. Because even though I believed in all of the things that they teach you in Christianity, I was not personally committed to it. I was living as if I did not believe in a God and was not acknowledging God in my daily life. That, to them, is what atheism is. So when Christians make movies to depict what atheism looks like, it's absurd. It makes no sense. Has anybody in this room seen God's Not Dead?
They actually, we had an atheist movie night and a whole bunch of, how many bottles of wine did that take, Dorothy? Yeah.
And you guys have legalized weed, so that would probably need to come out as well. So the first post I ever had go viral was my review of God's Not Dead. I think it was called What I Learned About Atheists from God's Not Dead. And of course, what you learn about atheists is that they're all angry, they're all selfish, they're all, sexually immoral. The atheist college professor he was a butthole, and he had no moral fiber whatsoever. But you find out at the end of the movie that he really believed in God because he was mad at him for his mother dying of cancer or something. Because that's what they believe. They believe that, first of all, everyone really believes in God, and anyone who says they don't, they're just lying to themselves. And thankfully, these people holding Bibles can tell us what we really think because they know better than we do what's going on inside of us. And that movie depicts what they think is really happening. They believe that everybody really believes in God. It's just that some of us are rebelling against a God we believe in and are angry at because something didn't go the way we wanted in our lives. Which, of course, is a terribly minimalizing way to portray us. And it's also it deprives us of our own self-ownership and personal agency to say, I'm going to tell you what you really think because I know better than you do. This is what I mean when I say they consider themselves the designated adults for the whole world. And I will have people who are younger than me, like teenagers, talk down to me like I'm a small child because they know that I'm not a Christian. And that's the way they see things. So they think an atheist is somebody who just denies the existence of God, but knows there is a God deep down, and they're just rebelling against it because they're angry at God. And that's why everybody who then later talks about their conversion, they can all say, I used to be an atheist. Because what they mean is, I had a time period where I lived as if there were no God. But of course, that's not at all what we mean. So then when we try to talk to them about what we believe, they're going to tell us, you're wrong. You really do believe in God. And I'm like, no, I really don't. I don't know how to make you understand. I don't. They just can't conceive of it.
Oh, we have a question.
All right.
Am I running out of time? Hi.
Hey.
Hey, Neil, it's Sherry. We spoke by email a little bit. How are you?
Hey, good. How are you?
Thanks for joining us. I guess I'm going to dovetail onto what you just said. When we do outreach, sometimes I had to learn that there's a secret, creepy language that Christians speak.
Yes.
For example, there are many rooms in my Father's house.
Ooh, yes.
What? And one time someone at Outreach said, well, you're just bitter. And I said, no, actually, I'm kind of a cheerful person. And my former evangelical friend went, ugh. And she had to explain to me that's a really horrible insult to call somebody bitter. And so I had to learn this the hard way. And so the moments of breakthrough that I've had are when I was able to go around their script and go around their secret language. So instead of them saying, oh, you're just angry at God, I refuse to use the word God. I say I don't believe that supernatural beings exist. And I'm wondering, does that ever work for you? Or do you try?
I sometimes try when I'm pushed into the discussion. Honestly, I avoid the discussion in person a lot of the time, because if it comes up face to face, it's probably somebody in my family or that I work with, and I don't need that tension. And I know I'm going to lose that argument, because they're not going to change their minds, you know? Now, there are people who I think do a really good job of doing that intentionally. Like, you've ever seen the street epistemology?
Anthony Magnabosco.
Anthony's a friend, and so is Peter, and they have done a really good job of explaining how you don't have to necessarily set out thinking that you're going to convert other people to thinking the same way you do. But you're definitely doing everyone a favor if you're helping them understand that we don't always know everything. You know, I mean, that in and of itself is the core of what being a skeptic is. It's just, you know, what was the ancient Greeks said? Know thyself. To me, that's like that's the beginning of all wisdom, you know, and just knowing that you don't know everything. And so when you talk to other people, I think it's completely legit to try to find things that you know that they don't know for certain, and kind of remind them that they don't know that. And what I end up doing is I listen to progressive Christians a lot to see how they talk to conservative Christians, because progressive Christians essentially take what is often indistinguishable from skepticism and atheism, but they couch it in Christianese. You know, they know how to use Jesus to explain why what the church is doing is dumb. Because I think if Jesus were, first of all, real, and I think he probably was a real person, I just don't think he was magic. But that's a discussion for another day. But if he were to show up in a church, like tomorrow morning at the church where I go to, he'd be kicked out pretty quick, because he would say things that would really upset a lot of people. You know, I mean, nothing about Christianity today looks anything like that. So if I listen to progressive Christians and how they use Jesus to explain what's wrong with what conservative Christians believe, I learn a lot about how to talk to them. And so I borrow a lot of their language. And sometimes what I'll say is, I don't believe in gods, plural, which of course sounds like I'm changing the subject to them, because that's not even what they want to talk about. They believe that their God is the only God there is and that's worth talking about. But if I say I don't believe in gods, it's like what you just said. I don't believe in anything supernatural. And of course, it doesn't end the discussion. It just kind of changes the framework of it a little bit.
Well, when you mentioned that there's that screen between us, like when I'm able to use that change of language effectively, I've had some really warm, lovely moments with people when you see the screen come down. And then they actually connect, and they see me as a human being, and it's a beautiful thing. But there are some people, they retreat further behind the screen because their script doesn't know how to handle the change in language, and then they sort of wander off bewildered, or they're just rude, you know, and like you say, really patronizing. So
it's protective. It's self-protection is what it is. And at some level, it does make me a little bit more patient with them when I realize, because I remember what it was like to be deathly afraid that I would lose faith. I remember that. I remember being terrified thinking about what would happen to me. And they're going through the same thing. At some level, people who are obsessed with apologetics are really doing it because they're trying to convince themselves. The people who are the most into apologetics, some of them are just jerks, and they just love being right about everything and telling everybody that they're wrong. But a larger portion of them, I think, are people who are struggling with their own doubts. And when they come at you with all these arguments, what we hear them saying is, you need to change your mind because you're thinking wrong, and here's why you're wrong. But what if we heard them differently? What if we heard them saying, I need to know from you if you have a good answer for this, because I've been wrestling with it for a decade, and I can't find anybody that can explain this to me. Maybe you can. They'll never say that, because they may not even be that aware themselves of how much they're struggling with their own beliefs. But the people who are the most belligerent are often the ones who feel the most threatened because they struggle the most with doubts.
Yeah,
and I think if we remember that, it might make us a little bit more patience with them.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm actually not capable of arguing apologetics. I'm a fourth-generation atheist, and I can't retain the language. So I'm just there as an ambassador for humanism, and I'm trying to make a human connection to say, stop dehumanizing me. Please don't treat me like this, or my family, or my loved ones.
Even in the church, they have a realization that the methods that they use to convert people are kind of dumb. They really don't work. Like you don't scare people into the, well, I guess some of them do, but many of them realize that building relationships with people is the best way to evangelize. They call it relational evangelism. That just being good friends with people is a way to make them realize that you have something maybe they want. Well, I think the same thing is true of being a humanist. Like you said, I don't think arguing with people is necessarily the way to go. I think that for some people it might be, because that's kind of their thing and they're good at it, especially if they can be polite and not jerks about it. But call it relational devangelism, I think what needs to happen more than anything else is enough people have to come out that are in a position to do so, to say, yeah, I'm a humanist, or I'm an atheist, or I'm an agnostic, or whatever, and it normalizes it to some degree. Especially if they're not being belligerent about it, especially if they can just be somebody who is capable of being respectful towards other people, being sensitive to the fact that they are insecure, but not saying it out loud because that's rude and mean too, but just acknowledging that the other people are struggling with this too, and being sensitive to that and being kind toward them. I think it helps personalize, it helps humanize humanism.
Yeah,
it makes them realize we're not just a two-dimensional cardboard figure that they're supposed to throw darts at, and then run off. Yeah. We're a person that they can know that's actually not that different from them. We just need to humanize it for them and make it real.
Yeah, I think that's obvious sometimes when you see the panic in their face when their script no longer works.
Their body language changes completely.
Very, very clearly, yeah.
And usually what happens when the script runs out is anger comes out. There's a lot of anger, and the subject will be changed dramatically to something else. And that's when the conversation's over. They've quit because now they've run out, and you need to just back off and do something else.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you, Neil. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Neil, that's it for the questions. That's it for the questions. Absolutely fantastic. I'm so glad you joined us.
Thank you.
And from all of us in Winnipeg, and actually we have people here from Steinbach, Morris, Enola. You'll have to get out your map of Manitoba and find.
I will. And what's really funny is that right now I have a housemate who is from Canada, and for the life of me, I cannot remember which province, but his family, his parents, are visiting from wherever they live for Thanksgiving. It's somewhere in Canada, I don't really know where everything is up there. It's like everything's really long and tall, and I thought it was mostly tundra. But anyway, they are German Canadians that are, he is a Baptist minister, an independent fundamentalist Baptist minister. And they are on the other side of that wall, and I'm not telling them what I'm doing right now because that will make them very uncomfortable. But I think it's ironic I've got Canadians living with me this weekend as well.
Ask them if they're from Winkler. Winkler.
Okay, hold on. Don't go away. Let me go ask them where they're from. Will you just wait?
Okay, okay.
Curious. Hold on. Apparently I ran them off. They knew that I was having a meeting in here, and they all just scattered and went away. They must have gone out to eat.
Maybe they had their ear to the door.
I hope not. Huh?
But I guess we're going to sign off because I have no more questions for you. I'll send you some follow-up emails, but absolutely fantastic visit. We should do this again. And thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'll throw in a plug real quick. Just a plug real quick. So yeah, all you gotta do is just Google Godless and Dixie, and you can kind of go over the site. I've taken a lot of time to put everything together into that sort of topical arrangement, so that you can click through and pick out like top 10 posts and things that are all categorized. But also there's places where you can go in, and if you like what you see there, you can always help support me, through Patreon, or you could just help recommend friends to read it, because I really do hit these topics from an angle that a lot of other people in the atheist movement don't come at it from, because they've always been outsiders to the religion. And eventually I want to put together a book that kind of collects all of this into one volume. So keep following that, and then as future talks come up, you'll have something to share with them.
Again, thank you, and good night.
Good night.